pain in the butt to try and compare them and do stuff, but whatever. Anyway, show's live. Hello to all you Patriots out there in podcast land, and welcome to episode 146 of Canadian Patriot Podcast, the number one live podcast in Canada. We're recording on Monday, August 13th, 2018. As always, my name is Andrew. I'm a recovering libertarian, your host, a competitive shooter, and a firearms instructor at Ragnarok Tactical.
All right, and I'm Marty, hunter and sport shooter in rural southern Ontario.
It's really hard to drink while I'm supposed to be reading stuff because there's usually people when I have an opportunity to drink. We'd love to hear your feedback about the show. Please visit CanadianPatriotPodcast.com/feedback, or you can email us feedback@CanadianPatriotPodcast.com. Versions of one more time. Versions of the show are available on Stitcher and iTunes. Links in the show notes.
All right, and as always, if you so choose, you can check out the podcast at facebook.com/Canadian Patriot Podcast or Instagram at instagram.com/Canadian Patriot Podcast.
We need your help to support the show. Visit patreon.com/CPP and become a Patreon today. You get a better quality version of the show for just $1 an episode, and the more you pledge, the better the rewards are. Show you're not a communist. Buy a CPP t-shirt for just $19.99 plus shipping and theft. You can visit CanadianPodcast.com homepage and follow the link on the right, and that'll take you to Ragnarok Tactical, where you can buy a t-shirt for the podcast, or for Ragnarok Tactical, or Band-Aids. So those are important. What are we drinking? Every week, Arrowhead Coffee brings us What Are We Drinking? Arrowhead Coffee is owned and operated by Canadian Armed Forces veterans. They love our country, the true north, strong and free, their family and friends. Join Arrowhead Coffee on their hunt for the perfect brew to raise morale and bring that feeling of home to you, no matter where you are. A portion of all profits helps Canadian Armed Forces members, veterans, and their families. And that brings us to my favorite segment. It's called What Are We Drinking? It's where I ask Marty, what are you drinking?
Coors Banquet.
The official beer. Solid choice.
Official beer.
Show notes are wrong. I am not drinking 40 Creek this week. I am drinking Crown Royal Maple. Reasons. If I could do the show notes, that would be even better. I probably shouldn't do that live. This is a lot easier with more than two people because I can do stuff in the background, like interact with the audience and read my show notes and make changes on the fly. And it's not as hard. It's not as easy with just the two of us, but it's okay. Do you want to talk about your shotgun match that you match directed on the weekend?
Yeah, we can talk about it briefly. I ran a local shotgun match, action shotgun match here. Some of the fellow hosts or panelists of the podcast were able to shoot it. We had a bunch of guys through 5 stages, roughly 90 rounds, I think, but the final round count, and went well. I
got identified as that podcast guy after somebody got Gavin as that other podcast guy.
Yeah, I believe Gavin was the one that was recognized, and then you just kind of volunteered that you were also a podcaster.
I got recognized by more than one person. Yes, in the case you're talking about where you were ROing. Like, I know that podcast Gavin's on. I've also participated in it. You can find it on the internet. But yeah, one of the guys on stage 2.
That's the big one.
I was walking over there and somebody recognized me when they weren't on my squad and they weren't one of the staff, but like I was passing another squad and they're like, "Hey, Canadian Patriot Podcast, I listen to you guys." It's like, cool, random dude with a shotgun.
Yeah, so I don't know. I thought the stages were fun myself when I shot it. We definitely had some large amounts of running on some of our stages. So it's one of those things like as match, like I'm kind of designing the stages. I'm like, oh yeah, we'll go here. It'll be a big running stage. It'll be fun. And then I start seeing as I'm like ROing, like some of the guys that I know are, let's say, very fit, and at the end of it, like they're huffing. And I'm like, oh, this one might have been we might have pushed this one.
They were some good stages. I mean, you're lucky that the property that you were running this on, you have the opportunity to do some very long stages, and I appreciate that you didn't go ridiculous with the round count. That it was more of that run and move. I think what was the longest or the highest round count stage was only 24.
Yeah, 24 was the highest round count stage.
Yeah, and I mean, I appreciate that as a shooter because like once you start getting past that, you start running out of belt real estate. Like you're in your fifth and sixth carriers.
Yeah. So and part of that was a couple things. For one is I've like I like having a bit of those bit of gaps for running. It's one thing that I find, especially I've seen it on the shotgun side of things. People don't move when they can move. If you know what I mean, like
Yeah,
they like in
yeah, you're
those
absolutely
gaps,
right.
they still,
There's dead time where they should be moving and doing something else and they're not.
and so it kind of exposed that, and hopefully that'll make people recognize they need to do that. As well as it gives opportunity to reload. If you have steel everywhere and you're just constantly shooting, then you don't have the opportunities to reload. So just kind of having those gaps here and there just gives you an opportunity to reload and then get your ass to the next spot.
Yeah, I enjoyed that. I particularly enjoyed the shout out for the stage name Earl's Safe Space. As longtime listeners will no doubt know Earl and what those damn Presbyterians are doing on his lawn.
Yeah, I was trying to pay an homage there without upsetting the local club executives. So Earl Stabbin Cabin wasn't going to work either.
uh, Earl's Safe Space was pretty good. I enjoyed that, and the stage design was good. Shoot 8 clays off of the porch, and then run through the woods and shoot some steels. I enjoyed that. All the stages were good design though.
Yeah, everyone got through. We only had one DQ, and luckily, the guy was pretty good about it. He recognized it once we kind of explained it to him. Wasn't too upset about it, and essentially, he was actually just happy that he learned the rule now before the level 3. We have level 3 shotgun coming up in a couple weeks, so everything went.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, as a participant, it was a very enjoyable shoot. I really wish I hadn't worked like a double shift the day before and then traveled the day before that because I was just exhausted. But there was no way I was canceling out of like your match.
Yeah, and it's just throws out there as a big thanks to Dean from Select Shooting Supplies.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That match. He surprised the match. He was out there for every day of the match with his trailer. So for those that aren't familiar with Select Shooting Supplies, but he has like a sort of mobile store kind of thing like built into a trailer where he has you can actually like pay debit and Visa wherever he shows up and that. And he tends a lot of these matches, bringing whatever he thinks competitors might need. And I'll tell you, like it's not that's not a profitable thing for him to do. He's definitely makes a lot more money by being at home in the shop. Like he's coming out there to support these competitions. So if you need any gear and you're kind of local to the area, check out Select Shooting Supplies because he does a lot for the sport.
Even if you're not local, his shipping times are hard to beat. He's usually next day or faster.
Oh, that's right. They have those stores on the internet now.
That's right. The internet has got retail on it now, so you can order things through the internet and they ship you a physical package. It's really cool.
Things for that internet thing's really catching on.
It is. I really should find that Homer Simpson drop. That would be someday. Someday I'll get a better drop board and more drops. Let's go on to the news. First thing from the weekend. Everybody that's listening to the show is likely already well aware of this because it's been nonstop news coverage. There was an officer-involved shooting in Fredericton over the weekend. An individual in an apartment block decided to start shooting at other apartments and ended up shooting two other people. I don't know if they're residents of the apartment units or not, as well as two Fredericton City police officers. The suspect was taken into custody, and for some reason, the media took more than a day to release their name, even though they were taken to hospital. From what I understand, they're recovering from their own less than fatal gunshot wound.
So, I mean, as a match director of a multi-day match this weekend, I really missed a lot of the news on this. I mean, I was aware that it had occurred, but I really had no time or energy to look at what was going on.
Yeah. The good news is it doesn't look like you've missed out on much, because really there was someone that was indiscriminately shooting in an apartment block, and the responding police officers were shot and killed. That's really all that's in the news, but that's all that's been in the news for like 3 days now.
So it's indiscriminately. So like he had no prior contact or knowledge of the victims. Like obviously the police officers know, but the other two.
It doesn't seem like it was a targeted attack. It seems like some dude went off his rocker and started shooting out of his apartment into his neighbor's apartments. They released the individual's name yesterday, Monday, more than a day after the shooting took place. And from what I can gather from the CBC, the shooter has been described as some sort of a recluse that's addicted to video games and riding his bicycle. Now, of course, they describe him as a biker, and later on in the article, they describe it as a pedal variety bicycle, which was much different than what I thought when they were describing him as a recluse biker with a video game addiction.
Yeah, that's not
top-notch reporting from CBC. Sorry,
but that's not what I think of when I hear biker.
Yeah, no, that's. But from what I can gather, it's a pedal bike, not a motorcycle type bike.
Now, as a legal firearms owner in this country, obviously there's always repercussions of this type of thing. Do we know if this person was a PAL holder? Kind of what firearm was, what the sort of lineage of this firearm was?
No, there was very briefly in one CBC article that I read, friends of the shooter or associates, acquaintances, I don't know, someone who claims to have known the shooter says that it was a legally owned rifle, like lawfully owned, that the individual had a firearms license, but they also, all the associate statements are all same thing to the effect that he was, he's a quiet guy. He just likes to play video games, and he sits at cafes and drinks coffees and looks at magazines about motorcycles and guns.
So
seems like a crazy dude.
They have the guy. They know his identity, so they know if he's a PAL holder or not. And they haven't released that information.
They haven't. No, as far as I can tell, that information has either not been released by any law enforcement agencies, or at least is not being reported by any media outlets. And yes, the Justin Trudeau cringe.
It just seems unusual because, I would, with our current government, our current media, I would have thought if this guy was a PAL holder, that would have been all over the place.
Absolutely, you would totally expect that. I'm surprised that there hasn't been more grave dancing as yet. So far, there's been a lot of support for the Thin Blue Line, which is positive. Trudeau, of course, released a useless tweet, as did Minister of Safety Ralph Goodale. But there's no real statement about take everybody's guns as a result of this yet. I wouldn't be surprised if they don't use this as something for ammunition for C-71 when they're back in session at the end of the summer. So this will be lumped in with the Greektown shooting from, what was that, 2-3 weeks ago? It's another case of a firearms owner in Canada losing their mind and shooting everyone.
Yeah, but Greektown wasn't a firearms owner.
No, but this will just be
not in the legal sense.
Not in the legal sense, no, but this will be lumped in. And it doesn't matter that it's not in the legal sense. I mean, if we look at the Greektown thing now, the Toronto City Council, I guess we may as well just transition to that article right now. I'm going to move something up from the Star. The Toronto City Council has approached the government of Ontario and asked them to ban the sale of handguns and handgun ammunition in Toronto. And Premier Ford said that he doesn't think that he's going to do that. The quote that I've got is, "I wouldn't support a ban on handguns. There's a lot of legal, responsible handgun owners. We have to refocus all of our resources going after the bad guys, not the good guys." So, I don't know. The Premier seems pretty reasonable in this stance. They're not It is not your average duck hunter or sport shooter that's going around and indiscriminately killing people in downtown Toronto or shooting up apartment buildings in Fredericton. These people don't possess their guns legally, or they don't use them for legal purposes. So banning guns isn't going to stop these people from doing illegal or crazy things. They have money from the federal government for guns and gangs that they need to be spending on enforcement for guns and gangs.
And this is actually something that makes me think of, like, we were talking about it, I think, in the last couple of weeks, about, we see these, like the RCMP will release the photos of all of the weapons and ammunition that they'll have confiscated from, like, a drug bust. And you'll see, like, 20 different pistols and rifles and, like, 30 rounds of ammunition total.
I know, we've talked about that.
It's
the
like
arsenals of ammunition that they have, and it's like, you guys couldn't fill a magazine for every firearm in the photo. Like, and I mean like a Canadian magazine. I don't even mean like a full magazine.
It's just like these guys, they're not active shooters. They're not buying ammunition. They're not training. They're not like, so people that are buying ammunition are not these guys.
Right. Your average gangbanger is not walking to Flaherty's and putting down a Visa to pick up a flat of shotgun shells. A flat is a lot. It's kind of like a bushel of marijuana. Actually, it's not. I mean, the amount
is not that much.
the amount that we smoke, it would not be a bushel of marijuana. What was the shotgun match? Half a flat? No, about half.
100 rounds, and 250 is in a flat.
Yeah, so not an insignificant amount. Still more than is pictured in most gun seizure photos.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you figure for a competition shooter, that was a match. Like, that's just, that was a morning. So about 3 hours you guys were shooting total, which, you're on the clock for, let's say, 5 minutes max. So in that 5 minutes, you went through 100 rounds.
Oh, not even. I can tell you what my clock time was. I think it was, I think I did the whole thing in under 300 seconds. I'm sure it was under that. What was my time was 280 seconds for the whole match. So what's that, like 4 minutes of shooting?
Yeah.
Something, anyway. The other thing, yeah, whatever. It's less than 5 minutes of shooting. It was 90 rounds. It was a good time. The other thing that I have in this article from the Red Star was the clown world logic that city councilor is using. So there's this fellow on city council that actually brought forth the motion. So Joe Cressy that put the motion forward to go to the Ontario government and tell them to stop the sale of handguns and handgun ammunition in Toronto. And I have a couple of choice quotes from Councillor Cressy. He says that there's a direct link around the world to the number of guns and the number of shootings. And then he goes on to say that, as usual, Doug Ford's logic fails to manifest itself in anything that will solve the issue of gun violence. It's like,
but yeah, there's a correlation between the number of cars and the number of car accidents as well.
Right. Do you understand statistics, bro? Yes, the more of something that there is, the more likely that something is going to be used for some activity. So yes, where there are more guns, there tends to be more guns being shot. But that doesn't necessarily mean that where there are more guns, there are more people being shot. The murder rate versus the gun ownership rate is not the same thing. Countries with stricter gun control laws have higher murder rates, higher intentional homicide rates on average. And I can cite sources to that effect because we have people that do statistical analysis and provide all of that data. But naturally, the people that want to ban the guns, like NDP leader Andrea Horwath, she's called Ford's opposition to a handgun ban disturbing. Because I guess in clown world, it's disturbing to allow law-abiding citizens to peacefully own property. Part of the quote from Horwath: increased gun violence in the GTA has devastated lives. Children have been among the victims, and survivors, and families and friends and communities of victims and survivors are facing lifelong impacts of trauma. There's an urgent need to address the sale, possession, and use of handguns and ammunition within densely populated urban areas and municipalities. There's an urgent
there's an urgent need to crack down on criminals
right.
doing criminal things.
That's right. But in clown world, if you just stop the sale of legal guns and ammunition from Al Flaherty's or Cabela's or Select Shooting Supplies or any of the, if you just stop people that have possession acquisition licenses who have taken the course and have their daily criminal background check run and have been able to prove for years they are not a criminal and they are not a crazy person, if we just take away their ability to legally purchase property, then all of the criminals that can't buy guns at gun stores and can't buy ammunition at gun stores, suddenly they'll be unable to use their illicit firearms for illicit purposes in these urban centers. Because that's how clown world works.
So seeing as it seems that, most of these, like, of the gang-related activity that results in these gang-related shootings centers around drugs and drug trafficking, why don't we just make the drugs illegal? Then they won't be selling it and trying to compete over turf.
I thought we were going to make the drugs illegal, and that doesn't seem to have slowed down any of the, oh, they're not legal yet. Maybe as soon as they legalize marijuana in Toronto, then all the gang violence will stop.
Yeah, that's got to be the solution.
I mean, I'm kind of half joking here. I mean, yes, part of this is like the problem is guns and
it.
Right. The problem is gangs and drugs and gangs using like illegal firearms for nefarious purposes. But somehow I don't think that legalizing the possession or sale of marijuana or other, like, say, narcotics is going to solve that problem, because they're still going to traffic women, they're still going to traffic children, they're still going to traffic the guns that are not the marijuana that's being legalized. Like,
also, they haven't legalized it. I can't sell you marijuana.
Well, that's a good point. They still have not. Hey, you know what happens in 18 months? We have an election. How much you want to bet they still haven't legalized marijuana?
Like, at the most, they're going to have similar to firearms. Like, firearms are illegal to own, and our government will sell you a license to allow you to break the law. I believe, and this is completely out of my ass, but I believe we are the only country in the world that the government will sell you a pass to break federal law.
I think you're right. I think the Australian style gun control has something similar, but I don't think it's a pass the way that ours is, because you're right. The PAL is a mechanism in law to prevent you from being charged for illegally owning firearms because of the virtue of having the license, which is a unique and special way to word it. But all of our firearms laws are worded in unique and special ways. Do you know who doesn't have to follow firearms laws?
I mean, I have a guess, but I think
is your guess that RCMP?
That was not right. That was not my guess. So let's go with RCMP.
Okay, because that RCMP, they don't have to follow the firearms laws. Saskatoon RCMP detachment recently had a firearm and issued ammunition stolen out of an unmarked RCMP vehicle that was parked overnight at a Saskatoon business. An RCMP vehicle had a firearm stolen out of it that was being stored at a business overnight. I'm not sure about you, but the way that the firearms laws apply to me, I'm not allowed to leave guns in my car. That's not a place that you're allowed to legally store your firearm.
Yeah, 9mm Smith & Wesson.
So if anyone's come across an RCMP issued 9mm Smith 5946, that'll be a little 4-inch jobby, silver with black grips, has RCMP logos etched on both sides, serial number Bravo Delta X-Ray 1238. You might want to contact your local police department and turn that back in, because they're looking for it. They've misplaced theirs.
Reading this article quickly now. So, yeah.
I don't really have anything beyond that. I mean, somebody stole a police-issued pistol out of an unmarked police vehicle that was parked overnight at a hotel in Saskatchewan for some reason, and the officer decided to leave the firearm and issued ammunition in the vehicle. The suspect is described as a man in his 50s or 60s with dark hair, possibly graying hair that is longer on the sides, balding on top, wearing a black t-shirt with white print and a beige or brown sweater. The Saskatoon police are looking into the matter because their guns and gang unit discovered that there's a gun that's gone missing, and the local RCMP is conducting an investigation to see if there was any wrongdoing on their part.
Yeah, no, I was hoping for in this article, as I looked through it, to see if, like, was the vehicle locked? Where was the pistol? Was it stored in the trunk? Was it stored in a case?
Oh, no, there's no
Was it
details
sitting
about
in
this.
the cup holder loose? Like,
No, there's no information about this, and this is one of the better articles that I was able to find on the subject in the Saskatoon Star Phoenix paper, or their paper's website, because it barely made the local news there, because this is apparently not a big deal.
now, what law enforcement agency uses a Smith & Wesson 5946? Like, is this even a service pistol? I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of a blast from the past, but the 5946 is it's a double single, kind of looks like somewhere between a Beretta and a Sig. They were manufactured in the 90s. They're like it's an old design. It's out of production.
No, it's a double action only.
Oh, is it double only? Okay, my apologies. Maybe there's something else that's got a similar model number that's a double single.
And this is my quick Google foo is showing up as a double only, and it looks like a short barrel too.
Yeah, they're a 4-inch barrel.
So as a prohibited.
Oh yeah, super prohibited, but it's okay because they're the police. They're allowed to have those prohibited short-barreled firearms.
So it's a prohibited pistol stolen out of the RCMP's car.
Yep. Well, I mean, the vast majority of firearms that are issued to police officers in Canada would be considered prohibited due to the length of the barrel. Most of them are 4-inch barrels, not 4 1/4 or more. Like the Glock 19.
I'm trying to figure out how many laws now are broken. So this guy's
prohibited, stolen, overcapacity magazines, unsafe storage of ammunition, or whatever they're going to do for having the ammunition with the firearm. So I can see there's
without a license.
You're around 6 or 7 felonies, give or take.
What they should do is make another law that'll solve it.
That'll probably do the trick.
We just need another law that just says you can't steal firearms out of police vehicles.
Well, that'll probably do it. YouTube commenters are disagreeing with us, or disagreeing with me, I suppose. Justin Trudeau Cringe Channel, who I appreciate listening and having all the comments on the YouTube, is under the impression that it's legal to store your guns in a locked vehicle as it is as good as a gun cabinet. And while I agree with the theory, I disagree with the having to go to court to prove that, because if it's in your vehicle, how is it considered to be in storage, not transport? I suppose unless you didn't have insurance on your vehicle and it was on your property, then maybe I could see you making a storage argument. But I have neither the time nor finances to go to court to fight that battle.
That's not one I would want to try to win.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to try and justify that. I mean, I can see the argument, but I think that
I'm not saying he's wrong, but it's not one I'd want to fight.
No.
Not in this province, especially.
Well, maybe things are different in Saskatoon.
All right. Speaking of crime guns.
Yeah, crime guns. All right. CBC article. Canada can't say where its crime guns are coming from, and that's actually not true. The RCMP and the public safety.
We know where at least one is.
It's been stolen from the local cop shop. really sucks when you're hanging out in a hotel with strippers and blow and your other cop buddies, and somebody steals your duty piece out of your unmarked car. I don't know that that's what's going on. I just think it makes for a fun story that way. I have no idea what the circumstances were around the theft.
You don't want to blow your cover, right? So you gotta play along.
That's right. You can't show up strapped. It's not like you can just carry a gun around anywhere you please. Anyway, my version of events is funnier than anything that's ever been reported about this case, so I'm going with that. CBC's got an article, though, that the government and the police are not collecting national statistics on whether guns are smuggled into the country or sourced domestically that are being used in crimes. Which is funny, because the public safety minister says that the majority of guns used in crimes in Canada are from thefts and diversions of legitimate purposes, provided you look at data between 2013 and 2016. It's funny because immediately after that, there's a decrease in theft of firearms from individuals' homes. That totally blows that number out of the water, because in 2017, the rate of firearm thefts from break-in falls by like greater than 10%. So it's back down to the 2013 levels when they started to increase. But I mean, why let facts get in the way of a perfectly good argument? The Canadian Firearms Program also doesn't track where firearms were used for in the commission of crimes, nor do the RCMP. What's the NWest people? It's like the firearms support team.
Dude, I have no idea what you're talking about.
There's a group in the RCMP, the National Weapons Enforcement Support Team, NWest. They're responsible for tracking firearms that are used in the commission of crimes through the RCMP. Like they're the gun experts for the RCMP. Neither the NWest nor the Canadian Firearms Program actually tracks where these guns come from. So they do all kinds of fun things with the stats, like if they can't figure out where the gun came from because the serial number was removed, they just assume it was sourced domestically and not imported illegally into the country. Which, I don't know.
I think we discussed
seems kind of like
before.
Yeah, it seems like not a great way to gather statistics, like by blatantly just making up numbers and grouping them together.
Yeah, like if I was going to do that, I would, let's say, at the very least, let's look at the percentage of the ones with serial numbers are coming from Canada versus the US, and then maybe at the most you could say is likely that there's a similar breakdown of the ones without the serial numbers on it. But even that, I mean, you can't really say for sure. It'd just be to take a wild guess at it. But to just all as domestic.
You just need to listen to Wendy Sukier, because she's quoted in this article. Sukier is, of course, the spokesperson for the Coalition for Gun Control, a lobby that wants to take away legally owned firearms from Canadians that are licensed and have their daily criminal records checks performed. You can imagine police are often short-staffed and have limited resources. They're working on solving a murder investigation, focusing on tracing the source of firearms may or may not be viewed as critical to prosecuting that particular crime. And so typically tracing firearms has not been a top priority of police agencies across the country. And then I don't have a quote, but they've abridged comments from Sukier that says she believes that there are convincing anecdotal evidence from police forces to support the idea that more crime guns are coming from within the country. Well, I can provide anecdotal evidence from multiple police agencies saying that the opposite of true. Like the Ottawa Police Service, for example, that released a statistic last year saying that 77% of handguns seized in Ontario are traced back to the United States. So if we want to throw around anecdotal evidence, get the fuck out. It's not a good argument.
Yeah, I mean, like it's hard to really make an argument against this stuff or for this stuff because there is just no data here.
There's no data, and the data that we do have
a bunch of people just making claims. Right. So there's a bunch of people making claims, and I don't even I can't pull up data to refute it because the data just plain doesn't exist.
No, and I mean the data that does exist is terribly skewed because they have things like crime guns. So a crime gun is actually just any gun that's found during the commission of any crime, not necessarily a gun that was used in the commission of a crime, just a gun that was around when another crime was committed. It's the same thing as like a firearm-related violent crime. you would assume that means that like the gun was used to shoot somebody or intimidate someone, or you beat them about the head and shoulders with it. But it actually just means that there was a firearm found during any violent crime. So if you get into fisticuffs with your neighbor and one of you owns guns, the guns in question get tagged as firearm related violent crimes. And they add one for every gun you own. So the stats that they do collect are basically meaningless. And the stats that they...
There's some quotes in here by Dennis Young about the vagueness of what a crime gun can be. And it's like there's some examples here of, like, say, a lawful firearms owner dies, leaving behind a hunting rifle that his widow has no lawful authority to possess. She surrenders it to police. The gun is, not a threat to public safety, but it could still be listed as a crime gun because she was in unlawful possession of said firearm.
Right, and then this is the problem with all of these numbers. This is all like logical fallacy after logical fallacy. There's no actual data or statistics to support or refute any of these claims in Canada, because despite the involvement of Stats Canada and West at the RCMP and the Canadian Firearms Program also at the RCMP, they don't have any meaningful statistics that you can do anything with. So I would say as we're living under the current Liberal government, and they ran on a platform of evidence-based policy, since there is a complete lack of evidence that guns are being sourced domestically, we should stop targeting law-abiding firearms owners in Canada, particularly in large urban centers like Toronto, by trying to ban the sale and ownership of handguns and handgun ammunition, since they can't actually prove that those individuals or those firearms are a danger to public safety. But that's just like my opinion, man.
Yeah, I got nothing to add.
Good. We talked about Dougie and the guns. So I guess I only copied it in the show notes. I didn't actually move it. Let's do something else. We got John A. MacDonald. I'll go to this terrible National Post article. Victoria to remove a statue of Sir John A. Macdonald, a painful reminder of colonial violence from City Hall. So the mayor of Victoria, British Columbia, says the decision is part of the city's ongoing reconciliation process with First Nations. The statue was removed over the weekend, and it is now in storage. And the reason for this, according to the mayor's office and the town council, or I guess it's the city council, this is a recommendation to remove the monument of one of the Fathers of Confederation as part of the reconciliation with First Nations, because MacDonald was a key architect of the Indian residential school system. So I guess stuff that happened in the 1880s, right, wrong, or otherwise, we have to go back and politically correct, because that causes a problem 140 years later with, I don't know, like, I guess this residential school system, well, I mean, objectively it is a bad thing, and it was not a good decision on the part of the government of the time to do it. And I would discourage other governments from doing the same thing, although probably not for the same reasons as the author of the National Post article. Like, this is bad, but we're also viewing what happened in 1880s Canada prior to the completion of like the Trans-Canada rail system to what we do today and how we treat individuals, which I think is a fair assessment of the Prime Minister of the time.
Well, see, I think in order for, let's say, a current or future government to learn the lesson from this and not repeat it in the future, these events in history would have to be preserved and remembered and discussed, which, if we delete it from our history, that's no longer the case.
Right. You would think that. And I can understand if this was someone who was committing, I hesitate to say genocide, because I mean, I suppose you could make the argument that MacDonald did, like, someone I'm sure will make the genocide, even though we're talking about 150,000 people in 1880. I'm sure someone will make the argument that he was committing genocide. But I mean, this is not like Pol Pot or Mao. That's Stalin, someone who's killing millions and millions of their own countrymen or people who are within their country that they don't believe should be there. Like, this is not This is not what like we think of as genocide in like a textbook definition.
Like, this is 100% like should be discussed within its historical context. This is something that absolutely should be recognized as something that occurred in our history. And, like natives, non-natives, this should be taught as part of our history and understood as to, what occurred and why, and within the historical context and an understanding of why that's not how things are done today. Like, there is valid lessons here for society.
Absolutely.
And just deleting it and pretending it never happened doesn't help anyone. Well, except for those of us in Ontario who get a free statue.
Well, and I'm just trying to find a quote. Is the Grand Chief of the band of natives that I can't pronounce in the CBC article or the National Post article? Because I'd like to. Yeah. Okay. So if we do that transition that I totally ruined on you, Marty, the Ontario government, Premier Dougie, thinks that we should totally have the statue of John A. Macdonald in Ontario. Now, of course, the communists that write articles at the CBC think that that's not the case because we already have one statue of John A. Macdonald in Ontario, and it's at Queen's Park, which is the seat of the Ontario government. It's in Toronto. So naturally, the only place you can put a statue for Ontario is at the legislature in Toronto. There's definitely not anywhere else in the province that you could possibly ever consider putting a statue.
Well,
So
if you're
I'm
a
not entirely...
liberal media organization, why would you look beyond Toronto?
Right. And I get that. And this is definitely me having a hard time with the CBC and the article of this, or the author of this article in particular, because they live in this myopic world where Toronto is Ontario and the rest of the province doesn't count. But that's not how the rest of the province feels. I wanted to go back to what you were saying just before you tried to do that awesome segue that I totally ruined. The Grand Council Chief of some Indian nation, or can you call them Indians? It's the Indian Act. Some Native Canadian nation.
Anishinaabe, maybe?
And sure, Anishinaabe. I feel bad not being able to say names of things in my own country, but again, I blame the public education system, just like how we didn't learn about residential schools when we did Canadian history. But again, that's just like my opinion, man. So the Grand Council Chief for the Anishinaabe Nation, Glenn Hare, questions why the government should go to such lengths to get a statue that many in his community find deeply offensive. We still have people trying to find out who they are and where they come from, and all of this is because of that one man. We don't have room for that statue or for that kind of history at all. We don't need statues. And I can understand that people of Native Canadian ancestry are upset, or that they find our government or our previous governments repulsive. But if we don't have the history, how will we be better people in the future? Like, if we don't talk about these things and why they were done and the context in which they were done and all of the other things that Macdonald did as architect of Confederation, like bringing an entire country together on a essentially like wilderness continent, like if we don't talk about all of those things, what's the point of having any history at all?
Just off the top of my head, like, I'm just kind of thinking about, you think about historical atrocities, especially, at least in the modern era. Probably the largest atrocity that I could think of would be Auschwitz. And it stands today. It's there. Go see it. They didn't go through and bulldoze it, plant trees, and pretend it never existed. It's there, and it's preserved for just this reason. It's a reminder. It's sort of a monument to what should never occur again. And so like I look at that and go, you know, there's nothing that I can think that was more horrific than what occurred there. And that's being preserved because we must remember that is a lesson that the world must remember. And then
Yeah.
to look at these type of things, you know, this is a much lesser scale than that, but still, it's like, you know, these are important pieces of history, and good or bad, you know, we have to remember these to learn from them and to move on from them. So I don't get this whole movement of anything that was unpleasant in our history must be deleted.
Well, okay, so I want to expand on that because in all of these articles across National Post and CBC and all of the other news outlets that I've read that have covered this statue, because this is big news. Like this statue is looking at the national media, like this is national news. This is a big deal. It's taken up a big part of the news cycle the last 3 or 4 days since the statue was being removed. Over, I think they took it out on Saturday. In none of this did they ever talk about Pierre Trudeau, the Senior, the 15th Prime Minister of Canada, because he was in charge of the residential school system in Canada from 68 to 84 while he was Prime Minister. The 1 year notwithstanding when they had the whole like no confidence thing and they had to do another election. Trudeau's name's on a lot of stuff. There's a significant number of statues of the man. But on the very last day in office, speaking to Mulroney, Trudeau said that, "I do not think the purpose of a government is to write the past. It cannot rewrite history. It is our purpose to be just in our time." And I don't usually agree with people named Trudeau, but I'm going to give the man credit on this one. He's not wrong.
Like, it is this not one of the main, like, sort of main threads of 1984?
Yeah, I have that.
Like rewriting
That's
history?
an Orwell quote, right? I actually have that ready to go. So George Orwell, writing in 1984, every record has been destroyed or falsified, every book rewritten, every picture has been repainted, every statue and street building has been renamed, every date has been altered, and the process is continuing day by day and minute by minute. History has stopped. Nothing exists except an endless present in which the party is always right.
Like that is a quote of essentially the dangers of government's ability to rewrite history. And here we have at least a segment of our population asking the government to do this.
Absolutely, and that's we've got really good feedback from me, General Augusto Pinochet on the YouTubes. Sir John A. Macdonald influenced the residential school systems to help Native transition from hunting and trapping to a more. We don't need. I think we're missing a word or something there, bud. We don't need statues, modern jobs, because the fur industry was shrinking. Residential schools were never originally meant to hurt the Native communities, only help them and adapt, even though that's not what they achieved. And that's true. Like at the time,
That is true.
The government felt they were doing what was best for the Indigenous population, because how can you be a modern Canadian in 1880 if you can't read and write? How will you be a productive, functioning member of society?
Yeah, the end result was not the intention. The intention was to help speed the assimilation of the Native culture into the rest of society.
It is a noble goal to be able to raise these people up to a status of being literate and being able to have a less traditional, like a more modern job at the time, so they weren't relying on what their people had done for generations.
And to make
that's not what they
more productive of modern society. And the intention was good. It's just that the end result,
the execution sucked, like most things government does. Government sucked since 1883.
Yeah. Like everything government attempts, the results are usually the opposite effect.
Yeah, I mean, the government basically always sucks at whatever government decides to do. But in the case of Canadian government, It still sucks. Even, 140 years later, it still sucks. No, I guess it's 150 years later now, isn't it? We just did that whole sequicentennial thing.
Yeah, it depends on who you ask. Because what did Justin Trudeau say? Didn't he say it was 200 years or 250 years? Or
Yeah, but he also doesn't think Alberta's a province.
well,
I mean, where's the lie?
yeah. Like I for one would vote for Alberta to be a country. And
I'd
to
emigrate if
join it.
Alberta became a country and stopped being run by
Exactly.
communists.
Yeah.
If they got rid of their communist government and became a country, I would totally move.
Yeah. If the West secedes and forms their own, I'm there.
Yeah, absolutely. Make Western Canada its own country again. Except BC. They can
middle Canada, let's say.
Middle Canada. Amazing. All right, let's do some rapid fire feedback. We've got a fair bit tonight. First one, we're going to do an iTunes review from Atrix Says Fix This. Rating 2 stars. Title: You'd think they'd improve after so many episodes. Review: I'm a fiscally responsible, I'm a fiscally conservative gun-owning Canadian with a degree in STEM fields, so I thought this podcast would be right up my alley. Basically, it's a group of extremely beta Canadians submitting to their American daddy who calls in and leads them around by the ball sack. It's a fact-free zone where opinions are based on poorly informed feelings. 2 stars because the gun talk is somewhat on point. I want to thank you for listening to something on the internet, but I'm pretty sure it's not our podcast because Marty and I both live in Southern Ontario. We've had 2 Americans on the show, Big Ben from Chirac and Matt from Texas/Tennessee/Northern Virginia has been on half a dozen episodes, maybe. So I'm not sure if that makes me the American daddy or if Marty's being led around by the balls. I'm not really clear on what you think's going on, but I'm not sure that you're listening to the right show. But I appreciate the 2-star feedback. Next time, if you leave 5 stars, suggest something for Gavin to drink.
Yeah, and I mean, this podcast, it's a group of guys having a beer and talking about the news. We don't have a staff of fact checkers. We do what we can. We try to intern on the fly, but essentially, you're getting is our feedback on what's going on in this country. So, I mean, I don't know what you're expecting from a random low budget podcast, but I guess you got to keep looking elsewhere, bud.
Yeah. Let us know when we can listen to your podcast, because as someone with a degree in a STEM field, it's also a fiscally conservative gun owning Canadian, I'd be interested in hearing your views. If you'd like to be on the show, you should go to the website. There's a button for panelists at the top. I have to do that quick interning thing that Marty said, because there's actually a link, but I have no idea what it is. Oh, it's CanadianPatriotPodcast.com/panelists. Fill out the form, become a panelist.
Canadian Patriot Podcast.
That's true. For just $25 an episode, you can be a panelist. Get that budget up there, because a couple of more of those, and we might be able to afford a really bad intern.
You're doing this wrong, bud.
Yeah. Good for you on the embedded marketing, Marty. Well done. We also have Patreon. Speaking of embedded marketing, CPP. No, wait, that's wrong. Patreon.com/CPP. You can throw us a couple of shekels. We'd really appreciate it. It helps me pay for the web hosting, because I like really fast downloads. So we pay to get the really fast download option. We pay for our hosting. It's not a ton of money, but the Patreon offsets the cost, and I very much appreciate that. I don't think we'll ever be able to afford to be full-time podcasters with a staff of rabid interns, but we can dream, right? Feedback from Patreon Evie. New subscriber here. Just wanted to say thank you. Canadian news podcasts that are not left-leaning and hard to come by, let alone a good one. Thank you for filling that void for us. I feel like I probably am drunk and didn't read that very well, but Evie is most welcome, and I like to think that we're pretty okay.
Yeah, I got nothing to add.
All right, good. Email. It's hard with the delay sometimes, because I'm not sure if I need to give you like a pregnant pause or if you're just not gonna say anything.
I got nothing.
It's okay. That's good. Email. We've got email from Ron. Subject, Trudeau and Tory letter. Hey guys, please read on air if you think it's worthwhile. Dear Mr. Trudeau and Mr. Tory, stop. Stop slandering the 2.1 million firearms owners in Canada. Stop painting us as the bad group. It has been proven time and again that we are not your problem. Stop being so naive. Stop ignoring the facts. Criminals are already not obeying your laws. What could possibly make you think they will start? We've heard a lot about gun control and the erroneous ideas that Bill C-71 or any further gun control measures would make us safer. But your government also introduced Bill C-75 that would allow large numbers of indictable criminal offenses to be tried as summary offenses, read lower sentence or none at all. Things such as Section 357, which covers bringing into Canada property obtained by crime, read gun smuggling, and Section 467.11, Section 1, participation in activities of criminal organizations. Oh yes, gun smuggling. Of particular interest, Section 8318, Section 1. I guess that's paragraph 1, maybe is how that's annotated. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. Good. Which is participation in activities of terrorist groups could also be punished as a summary offense. All of these offenses were indictable offenses. Now your government is set to quietly turn these offenses into hybrid offenses where the court could decide on a much lighter sentence than previously. So in summary, your government wishes to clamp down on the law-abiding firearms owning population, but relax its hold on criminals and terrorists who are smuggling and illegally using firearms. Perhaps Mr. Trudeau could tell me how further harassment and restrictions through Bill C-71 or any other proposed firearms ban on a population that is 6 times less likely to commit any criminal offense, licensed firearms owners, matched with a softer stance on criminals through Bill C-75 will make anyone safer. But I guarantee you cannot. Because it will not. In fact, it will become less safe. When morally and ethically minded people are restricted from owning firearms and criminals receive lighter or no jail terms, crime will increase. Criminals 1, us 0. Make a smart decision for Canadians, leave the 2.1 million legal firearms owners alone, and properly concentrate on the criminal activities of criminals. Respectfully, Ron. I really hope I didn't butcher that too badly. I want to thank Ron for his feedback. I don't imagine that the Prime Minister's office listens to our podcast, so don't expect a response.
No, I mean, hopefully this was sent on, which I believe it was. Unfortunately, it's been mentioned on this podcast before, but what's going on is essentially, it's theater. It's making it look like they're doing something while not actually doing something. So as a result, they don't need to, they're not concerned about facts because they're not actually trying to solve a problem. They're just trying to make it look like they're doing something in the easiest way possible.
Got to get those sound bites. You need that 10 seconds that you can run during a campaign ad. We got more guns off the street. There's no guns on the street. There's guns on criminals. Criminals that shouldn't be allowed on the street. They're criminals, but...
For more examples of theater, listen to them preach about how they've lowered taxes on the middle class.
Or meet with the ethics commissioner. All right, I've also got an email from, this pains me to say, Better Andrew. Better Andrew can't be on the show today. He's recuperating after a minor bicycle accident. Hey guys, I was bored at work and decided to do some napkin math in between the multi-million-dollar hourly sales I get, and found out some information about carfentanil. It's used to sedate elephants, rhinoceros, and other large animals. The average dose is 2.1 micrograms per kilo, which works out to 12,600 or 0.0126 grams for a 6,000 kilogram African bush elephant. That leaves enough to properly dose over 3.3 million elephants. Talk about a wild party. Wish I could have been on the show for that, but the triple backflip I did on my motorcycle didn't quite turn out the way I wanted it to. Anyways, I gotta go. Jeff Bezos is calling me again for more computers. Better Andrew. You know what? When he's not on the show, he's still pretty funny. I'll give him that.
That is something that we've talked about before, but the lack of coverage over the, and I forget the number now, it was like 46 or 47 kilograms of carfentanil.
Yeah, I think it's 46 kilos of carfentanil. It's enough to kill everyone in North America like 4 times over or some nonsense.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that that was not a bigger story is just absolutely insane. That is
Well,
that was
where would you fit that into the news cycle when you're busy talking about John A. MacDonald for 3 days? This statue thing's a big deal.
I'm
Okay.
just
Well, if you got nothing,
I'm just sad about our country.
I am also sad about our country. But hey, do I have a thing for that?
How much postage does it take to send a letter to Canada?
Who's it going to?
Canada. It says, "Dear Canada, you."
It's hard to argue, really.
All right, let's wrap this up. Marty, where can everybody find the show?
The internet.
Great answer. Really, really detailed. Top marks. You
I
can find
feel
me at
like
Ragnarok
everybody
Tech-
knows how to work it at this point.
I don't know. The internet's still kind of catching on. So I hear. You can find me at ragnaroktechnical.ca. We've got that emergency trauma first responder course coming up, 450 US. It's October 13 and 14. Check out the Facebook for the details. Or, you know what? I don't think it's on our website because we're just hosting it. We're not actually collecting the money. We're just helping organize it. Check out our Facebook. I'll put a link onto the website if I remember to do that tomorrow when I listen to the podcast. I don't think I got anything else. I think that's it. It's weird only having 2 people on the show. It's not as bad as the time I did the show by myself, though. Pretty close, but not quite. For all of our listeners out there in podcast land, I'd like to remind you that you are the true North, strong and free.